My name is Sergio Araneda, and I am going to present about the discussion around the validity chapter that we had on the standards study group. The chapter is very important in standards. The standards are actually explicitly saying that validity is kind of the most important thing or one of the most important. So yeah, this chapter had a lot of debate, discussion, very interesting ideas that happened during the whole process of the standards study group. Well, I mean, as I said, the standards start saying that validity is the most fundamental consideration in developing tests and evaluating tests. So standard really put validity in a very high place in the whole document. It's the first chapter and so on. We've changed the order of the chapters because I think there are many reasons for which fairness actually, in our opinion, should go first. But yeah, still validity was one of the most commented topics in the group. And the second, actually, before fairness. Fairness was the one that had more participation, actually. And yeah, it was a very enriching experience. We have very good discussions. So in total, we have 4 sessions during the study group. One discussion session with students only, and 3 Q&A sessions. One Q&A session right after the discussion session with the students, with Professor Susan Lane, and 2 Q&A sessions at the end of the standard study group after we've reviewed all the chapters. We had those last Q&A sessions with Professor Denny Worsbaum and with Professor Ezekiel Dixon. So the discussion session with the students actually had a lot of participation. I think it was like 4 or 5 group of 4 people. I got like 20 people, 30 people, something like that. It was a lot of people. Unfortunately, we didn't record that. I messed up that part actually. It was the first discussion session we had. And the group, well, we kept these notes in our vision boards in which the group kind of like collaboratively wrote their stuff. And yeah, and like there were many things that we wanted to talk because it is the first chapter, the most important chapter, and a lot of people. There were so many things to say. I select 2 things that actually are things that are going to be important for the new edition of the standards. First is a question in general about like what's the role of fairness related to validity. So fairness should be included as part of interpretation and use argument or not. What's the relationship there? I think that's a question that appear and will appear over and over in the discussion we have about the standards. Another question that I think is very important that also will have a big role is what's happening with the communities affected by the use of the test? What role should they have in all this? Because right now there is no explicit recognition of them, and second, when they appear somehow, they are seen more like subjects, like people that you are studying, like for user experience research, for example, but you are not giving really agency to any of those communities, which is in the last years, I think we have seen more and more awareness of the relevance of including that type of participation for many good reasons. So I think those 2 points are going to be points that will appear in the debate of the new edition of the standards and also appear in our discussion. With Professor Lane, we made a list of questions and she responded to all of them, not all of them, but the ones that we could fit in 1 hour. And yeah, I mean, takeaways. I am writing here a lot, but one that I really think we should consider is this idea of the expression score interpretation for users that is used in the validity chapter. The Professor Lane was kind of saying, yeah, I mean, when you say it that way, then it's not that clear what happened with users. So should you include users in your validation agenda or not? And she was more on the idea of saying score interpretation for users as well as for those users, kind of like being very explicit that it should be interpretations and users, both part of the concept of validity that is included. So yeah, I think that was something important to say in that also is a position that will appear, I guess, in the next version of the standards, or will be at least some matter of debate. And also this explicit recognition that fairness should be part of our validity argument, and if it is not there, then it should be there should be like a fairness argument, but it should be an argument about it. And I think that seems to be like the stance in the new edition of the book Educational Measurement and the validity chapter that Professor Lane is writing together with Scott Marion. So yeah, I think that seems to be the future of all this. We need to see, but yeah, the debate is kind of like leading to that direction. Next, we have a Q&A session with Professor Borsman. If you see the authors in the validity literature, Professor Borsman clearly has a very different view from what the standards are saying. Actually, the standards say explicitly that some of the tenets in his framework are wrong, which is actually kind of cool that the standard took the time to kind of explicitly say something about you. And yeah, I mean, we wanted to include all the views, be very scholar here, and kind of include all the opinions and the divergence in the concept of validity that are written in the standards. I think, again, like many takeaways, but the two most important that I will highlight today. First, this idea that the word measurement should be taken more seriously. So what do we mean with the word measurement? Should really match the expectation that it creates in the public. So that has been historically one of his complaints, if you want, from educational measurement, from psychological testing in general, I would say. That the word measurement is taken for granted, is given so too easily, and doesn't necessarily relate with what measurement means in other fields. So that's kind of one of his criticisms. And the second criticism, not criticism, but observation, if you want, that appeared in the follow-up question that we did, was this idea of, okay, psychological testing and educational testing, can it be that they are so different that they cannot go together in the same chapter because of whatever reason? And in his opinion, he was saying that, yes, he was saying that actually they were too different. And basically saying that psychological testing was like one test that is being used many times over and over versus educational testing that is kind of what you're validating is not necessarily the test, but it's more like the construction principle around the instance of the test that you're building that is renewed many, many times. So basically, in his opinion, the objects were kind of different. At least that's how I understood or interpret what he said. And but kind of pointing out that maybe there shouldn't be like a one validity chapter for both, or should be they are two different basically. And we had a third Q&A session with Professor Ezekiel Dixon Roman. This session was very interesting. He belongs more to the group of people that can be considered critical, post-structuralist, postmodern people, that type of scholars, that type of those type of voices, that also poses very interesting criticisms to the concept of validity that is in the standard right now. I think my main takeaway from the conversation is the concept or the idea in general of that representation has limits. So in this attempt to kind of like, okay, let's make let's include more participation. Let's make validation more participatory. What can happen from that? Is it good or not? Blah, blah, blah. So he was saying, yes, I mean, but depending on how you do it, eventually you can miss the point. Because if you do a technical advisory committee with broader representation, but if you're not changing the rules of the table, it doesn't matter which bodies you bring into the table. So basically, he was saying, whatever you do in terms of representation needs to be a little bit deeper in terms of like how do you do it, and not assume that because you are bringing different bodies, then you will have representation. That is not that simple. I like a lot that idea. I think that idea is important. It will be important for our field in the future as we progress, including or getting more used to the idea of participation. That representation needs to be problematized. It needs to be considered a little bit more than what we initially think about, like how representation should work. This is like a screenshot of the recommendation from students. Like we sat together and we were like, okay, what do we want for the new edition? So this is kind of like a summary of the things that we wrote. So incorporate fairness into the validity chapter, or at least mixing them better. Make the formal standard more dynamic. I mean, it's too static, it's too slow. Things are happening so fast right now that we really cannot wait 15 years to have any standards on things. It's too slow. Uh, Complement the standard with more documents. We need best practices. We need some examples, counter example. We need more to, not necessarily in the standard, but something on the side that can be used to read better. Um, what is the definition of measurement? Include tax now more like seriously, include them in the standards. And in the statement, the second session, second year, that we had a version of that that's being voted right now. So far, the statement went kind of in the direction of including more about including a better role of the communities, putting fairness first as the most important thing, and kind of also considering the idea of separating the validity chapter between validation and constructive representation, in the sense that when you understand validity in a more broader sense, and validation basically as a broader plan, then actually you may need different standards. It's you actually right now the standard they don't tell you how to write an interpretation. They give you ideas of what evidence should be there, but there's no minimum of what to do that, and that's a problem, I think. So yeah, I mean, we are kind of like leaning to this idea of we should consider constructive representation and aim it that way, not necessarily as validity, and then have a validation chapter in which there is some explanation on how to put all things together. So that's it. Thank you very much.